shorter than the questions were for the last talk. Fortunately, the previous talk sketched out lots of the categorical linguistic stuff, so I'm not going to outline it again. I'm just going to sort of highlight some parts that are relevant for what I'm interested in.
No time.
So, I like hecklers. So, the key thing that we're interested in is we want to work in compact closed categories, because there's Manoush was using them in the previous talk. They're kind of the place where we're going to interpret meaning. And typical compact closed categories that we're interested in are kind of the usual guys: finite dimensional vector spaces, the CPM construction applied to finite dimensional vector spaces, and rel. But where our vector spaces are over the reals, because we don't need the complex numbers like the quantum mechanical applications do. And then if we want to model a word like dog, it's going to be a state. So it's just going to be a map into, maybe say, some vector space of nouns, and it's going to pick out a vector representing the word dog. So far so simple. And then the question we're going to look at in this talk is how to handle ambiguity and incomplete information in a vaguely systematic way. So firstly, we want to think about what is this ambiguity phenomenon that we might be interested in. So we think about some interpretation of language, and we encounter the word bank in a sentence, and it immediately causes some questions to arise. Is the intention in the text that this is a river bank or a financial bank? One thing to note at this point is we kind of assume that if we knew if it was a river bank, then we'd have some concrete representation of that. So we know about these sharp pieces of information a priori as an assumption. So ambiguity's crept in now because there's two interpretations of this word. And then the next thing is, is one of these interpretations more likely than the other interpretation? That seems a thing that is likely to be true. If we're reading Wind in the Willows, then we might lean towards the riverbank, and if we're reading the Financial Times, then we might lean towards the financial bank. So clearly the context is going to tell us something about some sort of probabilities relating these two things. Okay, so this is informal at this stage, so this is not precise, it's just an intuition. If we have some representation of riverbank and a representation of financial bank, we don't want to go and have to figure out the representation of mixtures of riverbanks and financial banks. We want to be able to build them, to glue together things based on our probabilistic intuition. So informally we want to be able to take 0.9 of the riverbank and add it to 0.1 of the financial bank to capture our state of information. So this has kind of been done already by various authors. They've looked at particularly the sort of the vector space models, and the idea there, as hinted at in the previous slides, is to think of these sharp pieces of information as pure states in the quantum mechanical sense, and then to model ambiguous states of information as density matrices. So just take a convex sum of the pure states that we're interested in. So if we're doing that type of thing, then we're working in the category of Hilbert spaces and completely positive maps, which also we could say as applying the CPM construction to finite dimensional Hilbert spaces. So that raises the follow-up question: can we systematically use this CPM construction to provide a sort of a mixing construction? We've got a compact closed category we want to work in. Can we just CPMify it, and we've got a nice place in which we can do mixing? And the answer, well, seems to be no. So if you do CPM to rel, I mean, it works. You get a legitimate compact closed category, but you get some weird things. So you get strange mixing behaviour. For instance, you can take two mixed states, mix them together, and you get a sharp pure state, which is somewhat counterintuitive from the usual way you would expect mixing to behave. And possibly even more importantly, we've got two scalars, 0 and 1, which means forming probabilistic combinations. They're going to be rather boring. Basically, we either keep stuff or chuck it out. So there's not a lot interesting that we can do there. So it doesn't sound like a general mixing construction is going to come out of the CPM construction. Okay, so the next question is, do we care? Do we not just use these Hilbert space models all the time? Fortunately, Manoush has shortened my answer to this question because she worked with rel in the previous talk. So clearly we do use other models than the Hilbert space models. Great. And in applications that will be in the workshop tomorrow, for instance, we're working in a category of convex relations, which is wildly different to the Hilbert space model. So we clearly do want to support other compact closed categories as a site for mixing. Okay, so this is the slide in case I run out of time, so I don't have to keep too much of an eye on the 10-minute and 5-minute countdown. So this is the main idea, basically, is we want to start with a compact closed category, and we want to balloon up the HOM set. So we want to give ourselves more arrows so that we can represent our states of confusion, basically. So we want to keep the objects fixed. That would be the obvious thing to do, and then just sort of balloon things up. So there's a few nice features we would like with this sort of intuition about expanding things up, is that however we add things in, it should interact sensibly with composition in the category. So we're thinking about enriched categories in some suitable way. It should contain our original category, so that should embed in there, because it would be a bit weird if we'd lost the pure sharp information along the way. We want to be able to find that stuff somewhere. We want our new category also to be dagger compact closed, because that's a nice place in which to do this linguistic stuff. If we break that, then we're going to have to sort of start from scratch figuring out what to do. And then finally, we want to add this stuff freely. We don't want to require any extra equations or whatever that aren't implied by the mixing phenomena that we're interested in. So in the absence of other stuff, we just want to do this as sort of formally as possible. Okay, so before we do that, we're going to look at other sort of informational phenomena that we might want to capture. So the one we've discussed already is this idea of sort of making probabilistic choices. So we can read this binary operation here as it's F with probability P, otherwise it's G, and that lets us describe things like this, this informal statement. With confidence P, we think it's a riverbank, otherwise it's a financial bank. And obviously we want some sensible axioms to hold for this mixing operation. So if it's F with probability P or it's G, that's the same thing as saying it's G with probability 1 minus P, otherwise it's F. If we're confused between F and itself, then we really know F, there's no confusion involved. And how we build up more complicated mixtures of things doesn't really matter at how things are bracketed up. We can make a suitable choice of probabilistic weight so that things make sense. So this is a pretty standard thing in program semantics if you're thinking about probabilistic choice in that setting, and we're going to be pilfering from program semantics a little bit. Okay, so we've only considered this one phenomenon so far in terms of the informational effects. Another thing we might want to consider is where we're not prepared to commit to probabilities. So instead we want to say it's either a river bank or a financial bank, and the obvious way to model this is sort of a binary operation just saying it's F or G, and we require maybe commutativity, associativity, and idempotence for similar reasons to the previous slide, and that gives what's sometimes called an affine joint semilattice because we don't have a bottom element, so it's not a typical joint semilattice. Okay, but then those are sort of two phenomena or ways of describing ambiguity, sort of confusion between a bunch of things that we understand but we don't know which one it is. Another possibility is we just haven't got a clue what a word means. So I don't know what the word logolepsy means. What am I going to do? How am I going to model that in my categorical model? So the obvious thing to do is to add a don't know element. So that's what we'll be thinking of this guy as. So that's another thing that we would like to be able to capture. Okay, and then we might want to be able to model sort of combinations of these things. So I'm 90% sure it's a financial bank. Otherwise, I haven't got a clue what's going on. I'm not really aware of river banks. I just think it might be something else. Okay, so we've looked at these various things, and they look like algebraic gadgets that we should be able to get our hands on more precisely. So the one for the probabilistic mixing, those things are called convex algebras, and they're algebras for the finite distribution monad. And in particular, the free algebras are these sort of formal convex combinations of elements, and the ket here is just notation to hint at the fact these sums are formal, which is stolen from Bart Jacobs, who uses that trick, and it seems quite nice to clarify this. Okay, so if we want to describe the confusion without probabilities phenomenon, then we want algebras of the non-empty finite power set monad. And those are the affine joint semilattices we mentioned earlier. And the free algebras are just given by taking non-empty finite subsets. And if we want to handle this not knowing what logolepsy means, then we need a don't-know element. So it turns out those guys are Eilenberg-Moore algebras for the lift monad. They fall under the category of pointed sets. And the free algebras are just given by taking some set F and bunging in an extra don't-know element. Okay, and then if we want to form these mixtures of confusion along with incomplete information, then if we want to do that with a probabilistic setting, then what we need is subconvex combinations. So we use the subconvex distribution monad, and our elements of the free algebra are formal sums, but where they're not normalized to 1, they're below 1 now. And you can think of the missing probability mass as the don't-know probability. And we can do something similar with the non-probabilistic setting, but I'll skip ahead, otherwise I'm going to use it by 5 minutes. Okay, so we brought monads into play, and that maybe seemed like a sort of complication step. Where did they come from? But there's some benefits to this observation that these things all come as algebras of monads. And that's because we want to do this enriched category theory stuff, and we want a nice category over which we're enriching. So standard theory of monads tells us that these categories of algebras for a set monad are complete and co-complete, so they're pretty nice categories already. And then a more interesting observation is all those monads that were on the previous 5 slides are all commutative monads. And in this case, it turns out the Eilenberg-Moore category is really, really nice and makes a nice base for enrichment because it's symmetric monoidal closed. It has very nice tensor is probably the way to read that, because I haven't got time to explain further. And there's explicit ways of calculating tensors of free objects, which are the main things we'd be interested in. And these observations, I've been crediting Bart Jacobs with these things, but Bart tells me that they go back further to work of Anders Coecke, or they're easier to find in Bart's work. Okay, so then we've got to think about, if we enrich over these things, what do these enriched categories look like? Well, the pointed set one's the basic idea. You could read this as, if I'm confused and then I try and combine some extra information, then I'm still going to be confused, is kind of the effect there. If I'm confused between F and G and I have some sharp information, then I can distribute that over things. And then a similar effect for these probabilistic mixtures that we can distribute things over from the left and right. And the reason these things work nicely like that is because of this nice tensor that comes from the commutative monad observation on the previous slide. Okay, and then the basic point is, if we start with a dagger compact closed category C, we can construct ourselves a new category whose Hom sets contain an extra element, bottom element, so capturing incomplete information. Similarly, we can construct a category where we have non-empty subsets capturing this non-probabilistic mixtures with formal convex combinations capturing probabilistic confusion, and a couple of other constructions which allow us to mix both incomplete information and probabilistic or non-probabilistic confusion. And in each case where we do these extensions, we can extend the composition and the monoidal structure in such a way that we get a new dagger compact closed category. There's an identity on objects embedding of C into the new category. This category is actually free in a formal sense. It's the free enrichment of our original category C with respect to the appropriate algebraic structure depending on which choice that we make. And so we've got a very nice setting in which we can do categorical linguistics, and we've just basically formally folded in the extra stuff that we want. So to conclude, this ballooning plan, expanding up the Hom sets, seems to work quite nicely, at least for these informational effects that we considered in this quick talk. We don't end up with any extra stuff in our Hom set, so when we've moved to this new category, it has sort of exactly what we need in there. We put in explicitly the things that we require, and that's all that's in there. And even if we start with a category such as rel, which has sort of only a couple of scalars, we can form genuine probabilistic mixtures of things, but obviously just in a very formal way. And then 3 little either things to do or things to think about. All of the monads monads are commutative that we were interested in, yeah, is that just luck, or is it something to do with these informational effects? That needs a little bit more pondering, I think. And in particular, are there other phenomena that we can incorporate, and are there phenomena that we might want to incorporate that don't involve commutative monads, because that would mean a change in technical tack. And then finally, there's clearly a general phenomenon here that needs making explicit, and I haven't done that so far, but that's to come shortly, hopefully. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
So, when you were looking at applying CBM to REL, you said that there was a strangeness of having two mixtures come together and you get something sharp out of it. But wouldn't that also be a desirable property because you have mutual disambiguation is a natural effect?
I think you might want disambiguation, but you would want to, you'd like that when you add in more information. So like, you see the word bank, and then you get told, bank manager occurs or something, the word manager occurs, and that disambiguates. But when you're building up a state of confusion to start off with, if you muddle things up and end up with some muddlement A, and you end up with a further muddlement B, and then you confuse them together to make a third thing, you'd hope that that doesn't get more specific as you go along. So I think there's a distinction between forming these confused mixtures and then incorporating extra information that's sharp or sharper so that you can disambiguate again to get back to an interesting setting.
What do probabilistic mixtures on REL look like?
Well, they're just formal, so they're formal sums of the original morphisms, which then, I think that presents maybe some like sort of algorithmic, actual proper computer science possibilities that, when you've done one of these string diagram reductions that you do in the linguistics, in the end, effectively, you're going to end up with the whole formal combination of stuff that you built up. And then it might be possible to inspect that and do other things, like you might have extra information that you could use to hone things down or do other algorithmic things. So, yeah, they're very formal things. It kind of keeps track of all the probabilities of all the morphisms and then glues them all together to give you a final formal probabilistic mixture, effectively.
But your morphisms would still, in the EM category, they would still come from the category below, right?
Yeah, so you've got things from the underneath. When you compose things underneath that, become equal, they will become equal, but the formal mixtures will keep track of the rest effectively, so you'll have probability weights sort of carrying along these things.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, problem.
Suggest a possible working interested one. If you're reading text linearly and you can learn context as you go along, to disambiguate later, but you're not allowed to go the other way, that would be some variant of the state.
Yeah, something like the state monad,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah. So maybe mine's sort of it's like a local thing rather than something that is temporal. Maybe that's the effect, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.